On today's episode of In the Wild, we dive into the extraordinary survival story of Brett Archibald, an entrepreneur and businessman who endured 28 and a half hours alone in the open waters of the Indian Ocean after falling overboard during a stormy night in April of 2013. With no life jacket, no flotation device, and no immediate way for anyone to know he was gone, Archibald was left to tread water in one of the most vast and predator filled bodies of water on Earth, and somehow he survived. In April of 2013, Archibald was traveling with friends on a surf expedition through Indonesia's Mentawai Islands. The group had rented a traditional Indonesian fishing vessel to transport them between surf breaks and was making its way back towards Sumatra when the weather began to take a turn for the worse. What had started as mild waves intensified into a strong storm with powerful winds and rough seas that caused the boat to rock heavily throughout the night. Most of the passengers retreated to the lower deck to sleep through the storm, but Archibald, feeling seasick, chose to remain outside for fresh air. Sometime during the early morning hours, amid the darkness and violent motion of the ship, he lost his footing. Whether he slipped or was thrown by a sudden rock of the boat remains unclear, but in an instant he was in the water. The storm and engine noise swallowed any sound of his fall, and the boat continued on its course through the night. By sunrise, Archibald was alone in the open ocean. When his friends returned to the upper deck that morning and realized he was missing, the ship had already traveled miles. The captain immediately turned the boat around. Indonesian authorities were notified, and a rescue team was coordinated. However, finding Archibald will not be easy. Currents in that region of the Indian Ocean are known to shift constantly, and with each passing hour, the possible search area widened dramatically. Meanwhile, Archibald was forced to face reality. With no land in sight and no visible boats on the horizon, he knew he only had one choice, and that was to conserve whatever energy he had left and remain calm. In later interviews, he described controlling his breathing and resisting the urge to panic, knowing that thrashing in the water would only exhaust him more quickly and possibly attract predators in the ocean. He alternated between floating on his back and treading water, adjusting to the rhythm of the waves as the sun rose higher in the sky above him. As the day progressed, dehydration set in quickly. Salt water burned his eyes and throat, and heavy waves caused him to swallow seawater and hold back bile. The heat was excruciating, and with no shade or protection, his skin began to blister and burn. Hours passed without any sign of rescue, and the mental toll of isolation began to combine with the physical exhaustion of treading water and suffering burns. Adding to the danger were the sharks native to those waters. Archibald later recalled seeing fins in the distance and remembered feeling one brush up against his leg. Despite the terrifying encounter, he forced himself to remain still in an attempt to lose the shark's interest. As night approached, the psychological damage deepened. Darkness at sea offers no horizon, no landmarks, and no sense of direction. Archibald found himself afloat in black water, unable to see what might be swimming beneath him. Bioluminescent organisms illuminated the water with each movement of his arms and legs, briefly outlining his body in prominent flickers of blue light. Throughout the night, exhaustion continued to take a heavy toll on his body. His muscles began to cramp from prolonged use, and hallucinations began to blur the boundary between reality and imagination. At times, he believed he saw boats or lights in the distance, only to realize they were illusions brought on by fatigue and dehydration. To remain focused, he broke up time into manageable 2 to 3 minute increments, concentrating on surviving those seconds rather than facing the enormity of the hours ahead. By his second morning alone at sea, Archibald had been in the water for more than 24 hours. His body was severely weakened, and the effects of exposure to the heat and sea were evident on his body. At some point during that morning, he spotted what appeared to be a fishing vessel in the distance. Unsure whether it was real or another hallucination, he continued to watch until he was certain it was moving. The boat was, in fact, part of the expanding search effort initiated after his disappearance was reported. Summoning what strength remained, Archibald began waving and shouting in an attempt to draw attention. Against considerable odds, the crew noticed him in the water and altered their course. 28 and a half hours after he had fallen overboard, Brett Archibald was pulled from the Indian Ocean, and he was alive. He was severely dehydrated, sunburned, and physically wrecked, having endured prolonged exposure to the ocean and the sun and suffering extreme exhaustion. However, he had avoided serious injury from marine life and miraculously survived a situation in which most others would have given up hope. In the aftermath of the incident, Archibald spoke publicly about the experience, emphasizing the importance of mental discipline in life-threatening situations. Rather than framing himself as a hero, Archibald spoke about the power of remaining calm under pressure, noting the immense mental strength it takes to stay level-headed in situations that warrant extreme panic. Brett Archibald remains a businessman and, following this life-changing experience, has added motivational speaker to his repertoire.